Hello everyone, welcome back to EuroFever Garage. I'm your host Donovan, and today with me is my 2014 428i xDrive. Come along with me as I show you around the first generation F32 BMW 4 Series. After the major commercial success of the late E-generation BMWs like E90 and E92 M3 and M60 M5, BMW introduced the F generation to mark a new era of design language and technology, marking its debut with the F17 series in 2008. This generation iterated on BMW's push towards revolutionizing turbocharged technology and introducing hybrid powertrains into their lineup. In order to do this, BMW honed and improved their bread and butter, the 3 Series, creating the F30 and F80 chassis to build off of their N54 and N55 engines. The new generation F80 M3 introduced the first twin-turbo 6-cylinder, being the first M3 with forced induction. During this time, BMW also introduced a 2-liter turbo 4-cylinder, a twin-turbo V8, and a twin-turbo V12 to improve gas mileage and emissions throughout their lineup without sacrificing power or performance. To further diversify their lineup, BMW introduced the Concept 4 in 2013 at the North American International Auto Show. This signified a split for the 3 Series sedan and coupe, introducing a new model on its own called the 4 Series. This would be the successor to the E92 3 Series coupe. And just like the generation before, this new coupe shared many of its parts, including the platform, with the F33 series. However, BMW went further to distinguish the lineup by creating the F31 wagon, F33 convertible, and F36 Grand Coupe. Just like the F30, the F32 also got the M Division treatment, which resulted in the F82 M4 with the same S55 twin-turbo 6-cylinder as the F80, just in a coupe platform. As a result, BMW's lineup was well geared for the driver enthusiast who wanted to combine luxury and performance in the new age of forced induction, continuing BMW's mantle of the ultimate driving machine. Production of the 4 Series began in July 2013 and had 3 major body styles: the coupe, convertible, and Grand Coupe, which was based off of the 6 Series Grand Coupe at the time. The platform had a multitude of engines in the petrol and diesel categories. The petrol options began with a 1.5-liter turbo 3-cylinder making 134 horsepower, all the way up to a 3-liter turbo 6-cylinder B58 with 322 horsepower. Diesel options ranged from a 2-liter turbo with 141 horsepower to a twin-turbo 6-cylinder with 308. When optioning out the 4 Series, it had 3 major trims to choose from: the luxury line, which added chrome accents, a power sunroof in the rear, special wheels, and interior color options unique to the trim line. There was also the Sport line and M Sport, which included sport seats, sport suspension, and for the M Sport package, you had unique aero bumpers. When it comes to drivability, BMW is second to none. With rear-wheel drive as standard, you could also get xDrive, BMW's all-wheel drive system, should you live in a climate where the extra power to the front wheels is needed. With the Sport and M Sport packages, you also had stiffer suspension and stiffer sway bars, which allowed for better performance when it comes to spirited driving. You could also add the Track package, which added 4-piston brakes to the front and 2-piston brakes to the rear, as well as additional radiators for oil and cooling. If you are a hardcore enthusiast, BMW also offered their M Performance parts, which had a range of carbon fiber pieces like a front lip, rocker panels, and diffuser for better aerodynamics, M Performance exhaust, performance intake, a mild tune option which increased horsepower, M Performance brakes, which were essentially the same as the Track package but had additional colors and made the brakes a la carte rather than adding the additional pieces of the Track package, and 2 unique wheel options, the 624M and 405M, that were lighter and forged to provide a decreased unsprung weight and allowed for wider tires. At this time, BMW was revolutionizing standard equipment that would be launched in its cars. With the 4 Series, it would have standard xenon headlights and an 8-speed ZF automatic with an optional 6-speed manual. Additionally, all 4 Series came with the updated NBT or Next Big Thing iDrive 6.5-inch infotainment screen, with the technology package upgrading that to an 8.8-inch screen. This new head unit had increased processing capabilities and could identify more parameters of the car. This included tire pressure figures, advanced navigation features, and an optional heads-up display. Additionally, the car was programmed with 4 driving modes, named Eco Pro, Comfort, Sport, and Sport Plus. and depending on what options were equipped, the ability to customize each mode to have different settings such as suspension firmness and transmission shift speed were available. Some other notable options at the time were heated steering wheel, adaptive cruise control, blind spot monitoring, automatic emergency braking, and heated rear seats in the F36 Grand Coupe. It's also worth noting that there were many unique models of the 4 Series that included the ZHP package, which was a limited run in 2016, Alpina's B4 and D4, the M4 Competition, as well as the extremely track-focused limited run M4 GTS. In late 2017, the 4 Series had its mid-cycle refresh, also known as LCI. This included many notable changes, including the B46 2-liter turbo, replacing the N20, the turbo 6-cylinder B58, replacing the N55, redesigned LED headlights and taillights, bumpers, and new technologies such as the iDrive 6, a digital gauge cluster, revised suspension, and new wheel options and color codes like Snapper Rocks Blue and Sunset Orange. As a result of BMW's efforts, the 4 Series culminated the past decades of research and development into safety, technology, and performance, turning it into a unique competitor compared to its counterparts, the Audi A5 and Mercedes E-Class Coupe, offering heightened driver feedback and unrivaled performance. At the time, Mercedes and Audi were debatably behind on technology until they released their new iterations a few years after BMW launched the 4 Series, allowing BMW to gain foothold on the sport luxury coupe segment and cementing the F32 as an excellent platform for years to come. So today I'd like to show you what's so special and unique about this German coupe, why I chose it, and take you along for a drive and share with you the experience and ownership of a BMW 428i. So back in 2017, as I was starting my last year of high school, my brother just got his license and was needing a car. At the time, I was driving a 2012 Toyota Camry, and so we decided we were going to hand that down to him, and my dad and I would go look for a car for me for college. I didn't really know what I was looking for at the time. All I knew was that I wanted something that was cheap on gas, reliable, and easy to work on. As being far away from home, I really wouldn't be able to work on my cars. So how did I get to this beautiful German piece of engineering? Well, originally I was looking at the Infiniti Q50. At the time, I thought the platform was really great, reliable, and because it was a Nissan engine, it would be bulletproof. As soon as I took a test drive in one of those things, I knew that was not the car for me. After that, we test drove an Audi A4, and I knew that was also not the car for me, as it was basically a Volkswagen Passat. After those two cars, I took a test drive in a Mercedes C-Class and a BMW 3 Series. As soon as I stepped in the 3 Series, I knew I wanted to be in a Bavarian machine. The salesman mentioned that he had a 435 laying on his lot, and so we were going to go test drive that to see if it was something I'd be interested in. And wouldn't you know it, that was the exact car for me. It had the same technology as the 3 Series, but a much sleeker, more athletic appearance, and I knew this was the car for me. After the test drive, I knew that I wanted to be in a 4 Series, but the 435 was just out of our budget at the time. And so after doing some searching, there was a dealership close by that had a 428i in a beautiful imperial blue metallic. We went to go test drive it, but with the luxury line trim and wheel option, I wasn't really feeling it, and so I wanted some time to think about it. Well, the moment we stepped away, another salesman and couple came up to the car, looked at it, and said, "We'll take it." And just like that, we had to move on to the next one. A couple of weeks later, we came by a dealership that had two 428i's, one white M Sport with a coral red interior, and another with a midnight blue finish with a beige interior. After test driving both of the cars, I was really considering the M Sport at the time, but after seeing this imperial blue, I just knew I had to have my next car as navy blue. So we went home to think about it, and not 2 days later, the dealership called saying that they just bought a 4 Series from New York and brought it down, and if we wanted to come look at it, we should come in right away. And so we hauled our asses to the dealership, test drove the car, and I said, "I'll take it." As we were signing the paperwork, another salesman came in with a couple saying they wanted to look at the 4 Series, and I said, "Nope, it's mine." So today before me is that very same BMW 428i with the N26 engine, X-Drive, beige interior, and the beautiful imperial blue metallic. Under the hood, the car is powered by the N26 motor, which is the SULEV version of the N20. If you watched our review on the 1 Series, you'll know that the SULEV legislation called for manufacturers to create specialized engines with lower emissions to meet with regulations. In this configuration, the N26 has about 95% of the same parts as the N20, but has a different, more effective catalytic converter in the downpipe, a second catalytic converter in the exhaust, different fuel lines in the low-pressure fuel pump, and some other bits here and there to improve emissions. The result is slightly lower power output, but they feel very similar, just like the N52 and N51 before it. As you can tell, the car is not stock, and I have added some modifications and have tuned it with boot mode. I currently run stage 2, 93 octane, and have full bolt-on mods. This includes the Evolution Raceworks charge pipe, intercooler, turbo to intercooler pipe, a high flow catted downpipe, and FTP inlet pipe. So starting with the design of the outside of the car, as I mentioned in the introduction, this is the first generation of the 4 Series, which is the successor to the E92 3 Series. And just like its predecessor, the F32 is more sleek, athletic, and in my opinion, one of the best looking BMWs in recent times, though I may be a little biased on that. So compared to its F30 brother, the wheelbase and length are roughly the same, but it's ever so slightly wider and lower to the ground, which gives it a much sportier look and better handling because its center of gravity is slightly lower. Additionally, if you look at the back, the rear arches are much wider and more pronounced, which allows for wider tires and much more aggressive wheel fitments to be fitted in the back. So continuing on with wheels, this car originally was equipped with style 393s, which were a 17-inch 5-star spoke design. They were wrapped in Pirelli's Cinturato P7 all-season run flats and a 225/50 setup. In 2019, I bought these M Performance 624M wheels and had them refinished and wrapped in a Continental Extreme Contact DWS 06 wheel, size 255/35/20 square setup. I also added Berger Motorsports spacers with a 10mm front and 15mm rear. And as far as fitment goes, I think it looks great with only the slightest bit of rubbing on full lock in reverse. Otherwise, the car drives and handles well after these upgrades. So moving on to the front, as you can see, this car is equipped with the xenon headlights, as all 4 Series came with these as standard. These also are equipped with BMW's Angel Eyes, which I think gives the car a much more elegant and modern look. In later models, you could get an advanced LED headlight, which provided more output, or an optional adaptive headlight, which allowed the lights to go down without blinding the person in front of you. Another great engineering feature, which I think is overlooked by many, are the large air ducts next to the fog lights, which allow for a lot of air to go through past the rotors and cool them down, and then go out the side of the fenders where there's an exit for it to go down the side of the vehicle and exit out the back for less drag. Now, as we move to the rear, one thing that I really like about this car is in the trunk, you can see there's this ever so slight lip that goes upwards on the trunk, and this provides just a little bit more downforce as the air comes from the side of the car and over. One other design language feature that was new at the time was the design of the taillights, which I think look much better than the F30s. Now, I retrofitted these with the LCI taillights, but the pre-LCIs have the same profile and overall shape, so the only thing that's different is the actual inside of the housing. But I think both look fantastic and much more elegant than the F30s. Now, while this car wasn't fully optioned, it still had a lot of features which made the daily drive that much better. This car was equipped with the cold weather climate package, which added heated seats and heated steering wheel, as well as the technology package, which added a upgraded 8.8-inch screen over the base 6.5-inch. So on that note, let's move on to the interior. As we step into the interior, you can tell that this pretty much looks the exact same to an F30, and that's no mistake, as these are basically identical outside of the seats having this latch to get to the rear. Now, I've made a lot of changes and retrofits in this car compared to when it was new, and it's made me love the car even more. Originally, this car was equipped with the base steering wheel and seats, and I've since upgraded to the M Sport seats and steering wheel, while keeping heated functionality in both. If we look at the gauge cluster, I have the 6WA style, which has the hybrid analog and digital gauge cluster, where in the digital section, you have multiple settings that can be controlled by the BC button on your central stock, like your odometer, range till empty, date and time, and average speed. Another interesting feature about this car is how the cup holders were placed around the interior. At first glance, you wouldn't be able to tell that there were many cup holders, as in the center there's only a place to lay your keys and a couple of other small items. But BMW thought of this, and you're actually able to pull up this tray and reveal 2 cup holders on the back. If you look on the door cards, there's also cubbies to store water bottles or other small items like glasses, pens, gloves, you name it. I also added this Avon USA infotainment screen, which allows you to do Apple CarPlay and a bunch of other features. And since it's an Android head unit, you're also able to add any Android app that's compatible. While iDrive 4 is dated by today's technology standards, it still provides plenty of data to the user without having to read it from an OBD scanner. In the menus, you can go to Vehicles Info and find your trip computer, your tire pressure, oil level, and error messages or service intervals to check on. There's also sport dials, navigation, Bluetooth, an aux, and a multitude of other features and settings to customize it to your liking. If you saw our video on the 1 Series, one thing that's a definite improvement over that car is that it has 3 cigarette lighters in here instead of 2. Outside of the visible socket here in the center, there's also one in the rear, one under the dashboard, and in the trunk there's one on the driver's side. Now as we move to the back seats, while I wouldn't call it luxurious, it's definitely comfortable as I can fit behind myself in my seating position, and I stand at 5'9". There's enough room for longer trips as there's climate control and the aforementioned 12-volt socket, and there's also an armrest with cup holders and overhead lighting if you need it. So moving on to the trunk, you can see there's actually quite a lot of space for a coupe, and I'm actually surprised at how much I've been able to fit back here, especially with the seats down. Underneath the floor tray, there's extra storage area where I store my tire repair kit and sometimes will carry some extra oil and coolant because these cars like to leak. As we move to the left side, there's also that 12-volt socket that I mentioned earlier, as well as some storage cubby areas where I usually put my tire compressor or a battery jump pack. If you want to change out the battery or just take a look at it to check for connections, on the right side you'll see this compartment which you'll pull towards you and you'll see it deep within the archway. It's honestly not that hard to take out, but just watch a couple videos to see how to finagle it out. Additionally, BMW provides a couple tools in this little cubby on the right side as well. You get a screwdriver and a tow hook in case your car breaks down. And there you have it. That's a little bit about the F32 4 Series and why I think it's one of the greatest BMWs in recent times. Let's take it for a quick spin and see what it's like to drive a 428i. Right, so here we are in the 428, taking you along the daily commute, showing you what it's like to drive on some of these city roads around here in Texas. So to reiterate, a lot of this car has been changed, so it's not going to drive exactly like stock. The general profile of the car is still there, but it's overall amplified, if you will, because of what I've done. So it's a little bit firmer of a ride, it's a little bit faster, it's a lot louder, but overall the car drives very similar to how it would have out of the factory. Keep that in mind as I'm talking about this. So the first thing I like to talk about is the difference between rear-wheel drive and X-drive, specifically the suspension and weight distribution. So my friend who's got an F30, his is rear-wheel drive, but he's also got a manual. Now, I can definitely tell in his car the difference in weight because it doesn't have that extra transfer case in the center, or not center, but rather behind the engine. The car definitely feels a little bit more nimble. He does have a few more suspension components as well, like the M3 control arms, but he was running stock suspension, and his suspension was a little bit softer because it's been because his suspension has been worn down. The suspension wasn't nearly as firm as I thought it would be for an M Sport, because he does have the M Sport package as well. So his car has, I think at the time, 120,000 miles. So do with that information as you will. Now, when this car was stock, the ride was definitely wallowy, a lot more floaty, and it has what's called reverse rake, where the front is actually slightly higher than the rear, meaning as you come to stops, you can feel the weight of the car move to the front more because the nose dives a little bit more. Since swapping the suspension with Koni and Eibach springs, the reverse rake is a lot less noticeable. In fact, I think it's completely gone because the front gets lowered just a touch more than the rear with the springs. So it basically makes it an even ride now. I will have to confirm that, but visually that's what it looks like. On top of that, the ride is firmer, so I will notice over bigger bumps that it does have a little bit more crashiness to it, but I think crashiness is a harsh word to use. The bumps are certainly more noticeable, but The way that the new suspension transfers energy throughout the car, I think, is a lot more composed. Okay. Before, it felt like crashes were sort of isolated to certain corners, so if there was a bump in the front right, then I would really only feel it in that area. But now, the way that the suspension is tuned, it feels like the energy gets transferred much more quickly and allows the car to absorb the bump rather than just the suspension. Now, this is totally me just spitballing here and talking about what it feels like. I'm not sure those aren't the scientific terms for it, but you can definitely tell the difference between the two. Going on to drivability and what it's like to drive with the automatic versus the manual. In the city, this thing is super smooth. Now, I do have it tuned with boot mode. I have it with their transmission tune as well. Sometimes you'll notice that it'll have an extra hard shift at stops depending on how much power you give it. So that's something that I'm still trying to adjust to. It's not a frequent occurrence, but you will notice when it happens. Other than that, I think the car shifts phenomenally. I really love this transmission, and it can handle a lot of power. On top of that, the N26 and N20 motor being turboed, you do get a little bit more gas efficiency. It's a little bit more responsive to the N51 that I'm used to in the 1 Series. And it's got a little bit more punch because that turbo kicking in with boot mode as well. I think this thing sits around 21 to 23 pounds of boost. Other points I mentioned in daily driving in terms of technology, with this upgraded system, I use CarPlay every day for navigation. So if you're used to CarPlay, it's the same thing as always. The trip computer is also really useful, so I have it set to reset every time I do a new trip. The next time you drive, it'll just reset all the values back to 0, and you can see your distance, your average miles per gallon for that trip, and other figures for that. I have a long-term trip calculator for the trip computer on the gauge cluster, so I use an app called Fuely, and so that app is great to track your general usage over a long period of time, shows you your average cost per mile, your average fuel up cost. So mine's roughly $38 per tank, whole tank that is, and that usually results in about 23 to 25 miles per gallon in the city. On highway, I'll usually get 28 to 32, whatever it is normally rated. Because I have these wider tires though, the rolling resistance is a little bit higher, so I do notice that the miles per gallon are lower than with the 17 run flats. But those are Grand Touring tires versus these, which are ultra high performance all seasons, and they're wider. So other great features of this car are the driving modes. So I love the sport mode in this car. If you just put the transmission in sport, I think it feels really nice. The shifts are super fast, super quick. They're not Porsche PDK fast, but they are fast for a torque converter. The different driving modes also really change the profile of this car. So if you put it in Sport or Sport Plus, the steering force is actually increased, so it does feel a little bit more weighted versus in Comfort mode. When I drove an M4 as well, it felt like that car was in Sport mode already, which it is. Its standard mode is Sport mode. The weight of it felt artificial compared to the hydraulic steering in the 1 Series, but it did feel much heavier than my car in Comfort mode. So the electronic steering is definitely something that you need to get used to, because it really doesn't feel like much. I've done a lot to the suspension, and it does give more feedback than stock. Other than that, you're not going to get much feedback out of it. It does feel like you're turning nothing. But for some people, that's what they want. You don't want the hydraulic steering of the E generation. That's why they switched to the electronic. One, it's easier to maintain, but you don't get any feedback in comparison to that previous generation. On a totally different side note, the reason why I wear driving gloves is because I sweat a lot. My hands get very clammy, and I bought this steering wheel about 2 years ago now, and if you've ever seen older M Sport steering wheels, they get really grimy and greasy, and they have that really shiny look to it, and that's because they weren't maintained well. they end up getting really greasy. People don't maintain them very well. And so I thought, might as well wear these so I don't have to worry about it. I still clean the steering wheel on a regular basis, but other than that, I just like to wear them because they keep my steering wheel clean. Driving this car now for 3 years, I've really enjoyed it and learning how BMWs sort of work, how German cars work. People always call these cars high maintenance, and versus coming from a Toyota Camry, yes, it's high maintenance, but you get so much more fun out of this car, and this is really one of those cars that I want to keep for as long as the car will live. And I think that's what's so great about these cars, is that you get to meet so many people that have the same mindset, same interests, and really love their cars, and you get to meet new people who have that same idea. So after listening to me fanboy all over this BMW, what do I think you should do in terms of getting one, owning one, or if you should even consider one of these? With the N20 and N26 engines, the timing chains are really a mess. There was a class action lawsuit in late 2018 which entitled anyone who owned these cars to get it compensated if you had the job done, or if you're looking to get it done in the near future. Now, I haven't had mine done yet, but I just crossed the 60,000 mile mark, so this car is barely broken in. As much as I want to do the job, it's a very expensive procedure, even if you're doing it yourself, with kits on FCP Euro ranging from about $500 to $1,000. If you take the class action lawsuit path, then it's going to be still roughly $500 to $1,000, depending on the usage of your car. On top of that, the technology is a little dated in this car. If you like cutting edge technology, this might not be the car for you. It does have heated seats, yes, but it doesn't have ventilated. It does have an infotainment screen, but it doesn't have CarPlay as standard unless you add it. And on that note, there's plenty of things that you can retrofit in this car. Like I mentioned, I added the M Sport seats, the steering wheel, the door sills, and there's plenty of other things that you can retrofit to make this car much more unique to you and make it more special. On top of that, there's plenty of trims and options to choose from with the M Sport, Sport line, luxury line packages. You've got all the different options like the cold weather climate, technology, driver assistance, adaptive cruise. All those types of options can really help you decide on what car is right for you. For me, it was all about a car that had low miles that I could love on and learn the platform for years to come. This is a car that I never see myself letting go unless something major happened to it. And this is one of the first cars that really allowed me to explore my passions as an automotive enthusiast. So with that being said, thank you for watching today. I'm your host, Donovan, and until next time.